Welcome, everyone. I'm not sure how many of you there are, but I'm very, very pleased to be part of this vitally important event and thrilled that so many people have signed up. As far as I'm concerned, there is no issue that is more important than what's happening to food and farming worldwide. And as you can see, I'm Helena Norberg-Hodge. I'm director of Local Futures, an international nonprofit organization. And we've been trying to raise awareness about the vital importance of protecting and rebuilding more localized food systems. We're now going to be looking at a film that we made this year. It's called Planet Local, A Quiet Revolution, because we are seeing that around the world, from the bottom up, people are rebuilding those more localized, community-based systems. But we need to do everything we can to get the word out. So we'll be looking at a shortened version of this film, which we've done on a low budget, but we have some influential people in the film that are helping to carry this message around the world. It's already been translated into about 20 languages. And afterwards, close colleagues and friends of mine will be joining us. Smaje, Manish, Jain, and Mika Tsutsumi from Japan. And we'll have a bit of a discussion about all of this that I hope that you will all join us to continue with on Zoom after we finish this session. Thank you.
The underpinning core ideology that we are fed in the West is that we are competitive, selfish, that this is human nature. You know, that is in many ways the religion of neoliberalism. That's where it comes from.
You think you know what it is to be human, but you don't.
Yeah.
All you know is how a human behaves in a power over paradigm. But what if you were to plug that human being into a completely different paradigm?
For the past few hundred years, and especially in the last 4 decades, people on every continent have been increasingly at the mercy of a colonial, globalized economy. We've been imprisoned in a consumer society in which our needs are met by distant, anonymous corporations, in which external ideals of success are imposed upon us.
This competitiveness that you have to prove yourself by how much faster you can climb and push down the others, and it's been a deformation of the human spirit, I do believe.
But for hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved for a very different type of living. Tribalized. I don't mean tribalized as in ideological oppositionalism. I mean tribalized as I live with these 150 people. My survival is dependent on their survival. My contentment is dependent on their contentment.
There's no brain system that supports competition. There's no brain system that's all about aggression. all these assumptions that this society ascribes to human nature, they don't exist in our newer physiology.
And there's an ache now for people to discover who they are.
We human beings didn't evolve for a hyper-individualized, competitive way of being. For most of our time on this planet, we lived in collaborative, intergenerational communities, deeply connected to the land and the waters that sustained us. This is why you can now see across the world people have been pushed into this unnatural, high-rise way of living, disconnected from each other and from the earth. They're now developing a natural and almost biological hunger for community and connection to nature.
I see that the more interest among young people about farming and moving, especially moving outside of big cities. They are very, very hungry for communal bonds. So I see something very important is happening here.
And the young people in Brazil are already showing that they want this ecological future and local future, locally based and deeply weaved within territory to exist. And they came together within a movement that we called localization.
Beyond the mainstream media, on the ground on every continent, a quiet revolution is emerging. People are seeking community, collaboration, ways of life that nurture the natural world instead of destroying it. Farmers' markets, small business alliances, transition towns, mutual aid networks, community banks, agroecology schools, alternative education, permaculture, eco-villages, and more. Collectively, these diverse initiatives demonstrate a new path forward for humanity. It's a path that localizes rather than globalizes, connects rather than separates, and shows us that human beings need not be the problem. We can be the solution.
We are facing an emerging global civilization and the danger of global monoculture. And it is this danger that can be countered by the localization movement. It is localization that can enable the emergence of diversity, identity, autonomy, and resilience.
This is a time for localization. It's modest, it's simple, almost beguilingly simple. But it's also complex. It also means that we have to shapeshift. It also means we have to be different.
In local economies, people can see their impact on others and on nature. This is a human scale, where the structures create transparency and accountability and bring out the best in people.
This, for me, is the strongest argument for localization. When people work locally, they look after what they're working with. They have a longer horizon. They're not thinking to the next shareholder meeting, to the next quarterly profits review. They're thinking, what will this be like for my children and grandchildren? That kind of long-term vision is profoundly ecological.
What Mahatma Gandhi called Swadeshi, meaning economics of the place, and we celebrate the diversity of cultures and diversity of religions and diversity of languages, but we keep ourselves rooted in the place where we live.
When it comes to food, when it comes to the way that we organise power, when it comes to the way we organise health, and even, I would say, issues as potentially complex as justice, we need to localise where possible.
Thanks to globalization, the food we eat travels thousands of miles. Shrimp from Scotland is shipped 6,000 miles to Thailand just to be peeled, then shipped back to be sold in the UK. Meanwhile, countries routinely import and export huge quantities of the same product. In 2020, Germany was the world's second largest importer of milk and also the world's second largest exporter of milk. That same year, the US imported $3.5 billion worth of beef and exported $3.75 billion worth. Many countries engage in this kind of redundant trade. This is insanity in an era of climate chaos, but global trade rules actually encourage it.
All the international maritime and air transportation, the emissions from this are not accounted by any country. Just think of all those vessels with all kinds of commodities from China to everywhere, from mining, with soy, with oil, with liquefied gas. Those emissions are nobody's emission, because one of the key assumptions of the climate policy is that it cannot harm trade.
The global market pressures towards vast, chemical-intensive, monoculture-based farming. These monocultures actually produce less food while eliminating biodiversity and destroying small farmers. Local markets, on the other hand, require a variety of different products, and so they unleash the productive and truly regenerative power of small-scale, diversified farming.
Permaculture has contributed to that acknowledgement and importance of these smaller, localized economies for radically reducing ecological footprint.
It's desperately important that we take control in our communities of our food, to eat food grown locally as much as possible.
Saving seeds, learning from our nature, learning from farmers, we can grow enough food to feed all of India twice over by conserving biodiversity, regenerating the soil, regenerating the water, and healing the broken climate cycle.
Agriculture uses half of all habitable land, so a shift from global monocultures to localized, diversified food systems would literally transform the face of the earth. As people recognize the multiple benefits of local food economies, community initiatives are springing up across the world.
We have over 1,500 urban gardens and farms now all across the city of Detroit. We are going to build a local ecosystem of food entrepreneurs, and we are about to build the most delicious local food economy on the planet Earth.
Ici, nous apprenons à produire les fruits, nous apprenons à produire le poisson, nous apprenons à produire le maïs, etc. Tout ce qui va concourir à nous nourrir, tout ce qui va concourir à promouvoir l'économie locale, c'est-à-dire les richesses de notre terroir. C'est cela que nous visons. Mais si nous sommes là à consommer ce que les autres font tout le temps, on sera toujours pauvre et toujours esclave. Et c'est ça que je ne veux pas de la nouvelle génération.
Number of young people from the city want to come back to the farm is increased. They have strong intention that they want to do organic farming. Now we do a lot of training, mainly people from the city come. And most of them ready to quit their job. Many of them looking for land, and many of them bought the land already.
We have a madness in this world where food that is grown around our cities is largely exported to other areas, either within the country or even outside the country.
And wouldn't it be so much better if the local farmers had the opportunity to work with the local communities to bring their food into the city as was traditionally done?
Bristol was once fed by peri-urban horticulture projects, like suburban market gardens, basically. Since '85, the amount of land given to this kind of agricultural production, suburban horticulture, has declined by almost 30%.
In this country, it's really difficult for farmers, especially kind of new entrants to farming, to get access to land.
So Bristol Food Producers is running a scheme of land matching where it tries to get people who want to have access to land to apply through Bristol Food Producers, and then it tries to match people with available land.
We take pleasure in our day's work here and enjoy turning out plate food and watching people enjoy it, knowing that we know Patrick that's growing the mushroom that's on that plate.
To use the products in the shop and to sell them, but also to celebrate the Bristol food movement, which is amazing.
My name is Nelson Muzingwa. I'm a smallholder farmer in the Smaje block of farms. We are demonstrating and showcasing many of the practices that we relate to our local processes of producing food and at the same time managing our environment. We believe it is a movement that is connecting different people in many different communities. They cannot survive in isolation. They would like to connect for them to be able to participate meaningfully and effectively in the politics about food system.
Tene I sakyat po tene dang dire tu zanga da chamjik skyop se borche chingna tene ina sakyat ga ngati lakpane tene chodmek tapchis po ni rauna chamjik khakchan dik dukle
ngata ji la si cho na ta yon tan ji ko te no ka ngati abi me kan ngata lof si hoste no galal kalte zo to ngati skyop mar skyop na to ngati tor chagala le to tor na te ne ngati yon che se ne chugu na ngati chang la das pa yin ze te ta che shi met pa.
We are a group of friends in Budapest involved in different activities dealing with sustainability and more social justice.
we met and decided to launch an ambitious project for better well-being called Cargonomia. We would like to distribute healthy local food in Budapest with our self-manufactured cargo bikes. We bring all that foods and also eggs, beers to Cargonomia in the city center of Budapest. From there, we distribute it to people in Budapest with our cargo bikes made in Ciclonomia.
There's this widespread belief that we need big farms and ever more technology to feed the world. Actually, exactly the opposite is true. We need small-scale, diversified farms everywhere. Supporting this turnaround is an essential step in transforming the entire economic system, and is something that we can all contribute to right now, wherever we are.
Local food economies are essential for restoring our health and the health of the planet as a whole. But to build those kinds of economies, we must recapture our rights from global corporations.
Beyond these community efforts, localization must advocate for structural changes in the social and production relations between farmers, traders, and landlords. We hope to contribute in the building and strengthening of a global movement that will challenge the monopoly control of TNCs over food and agriculture.
It starts with simple questions, actually, of where does my food come from? Where does my water come from? Who controls these systems? How are decisions made around these? And it starts to connect to larger social movements who are actually trying today to defend our territories, to defend the water resources, to defend control over our own knowledge systems.
これから先、私ども日本でも多国籍企業による種の支配が始まったところです。今、ローカルで各都道府県、市町村、そういうところから我々は地方から私たちの食と種を守る。
And we need policy reforms that supports localization and agroecology and community-supported agriculture. The need to have strong mass movements of farmers and small food producers, of workers and consumers, and all their advocates. So we need to support and strengthen such a strong people's movement.
How is it that we have allowed control of our food systems and our entire economy to be put into the hands of giant global institutions?
So from the time of colonization, there was historical structuring or reorientation of domestic agriculture and food production towards sources of cheap raw materials for the industrial needs of the colonizers. So it continued with the neoliberal globalization of the past 4 decades. And they've used instruments like WTO, bilateral agreements, FTAs, as well as restructuring required by the international financial institutions such as World Bank and IMF.
Since the 1980s, governments worldwide have been signing onto trade treaties that give multinational banks and corporations more and more freedom and power. These treaties now even allow corporations to sue governments for any social or environmental protections that might threaten their profits. This makes a mockery of democracy.
You know, what did globalization do? It tore down all the rules that allowed justice in society, democracy in society, equality in society, tore it all down and made it all possible to accumulate. So you get the tech billionaires emerging. You get the BlackRocks and the Vanguards. And this year, BlackRock is 9.5 trillion. 9.5 trillion in a decade.
They own the media. They, of course, own the whole financial infrastructure. And so basically almost any aspect of our life today is dominated by these global corporations.
They want to reinforce the current unsustainable global system with a new technology. Now, as we move forward with this localizing movement, we have to be very, very careful with this word, new technology. Because now multinational corporations are taking over our food system with that. Can you imagine a future where multinational companies' servers on the other side of the world automatically manage the robots plowing the farming? The World Economic Forum has set the goal of digitalizing the whole world. In fact, Yale has already collected 24 million hectares of digital data from all over the world.
Saudi Aramco, where energy is opportunity.
Governments on both left and right are rolling out the red carpet for these corporate giants. They're freeing them from regulation, they're freeing them from paying taxes, and they're subsidizing the expansion of globalizing infrastructure. At the same time, citizens, small businesses, and even national industries are squeezed for taxes and burdened by ever more red tape and bureaucracy. That's why products from the other side of the world generally cost less than local products. It's why the gap between rich and poor is so extreme. It's a completely unfair economic playing field.
When you have a system that actively undermines the social network and destroys communities because it throws people out of jobs without any thought to the impact of what that will have on a local community. When a Walmart can come in and completely obliterate small local businesses, that is huge impact on people's connection to each other and therefore on their health.
One of the many reasons that the technological expansion in the West and now all over the world of the last few centuries is so toxic is that it has been intimately linked with the destruction of community. And this is a breeding ground for all kinds of insecurities.
But people themselves want nothing more than to be part of community, part of life, to feel desired within their community and to feel that they're making a meaningful difference to others around them.
Worried customers have been snapping up everything in sight. Store shelves nationwide are dwindling or totally empty.
We needed a pandemic to show us how resources need to actually flow and how localized action can create amazing local responses based on a new relatedness.
One of the things that happens in the midst of large-scale shocks and crises is that we realize very quickly how vulnerable our globalized supply chains are. And in the rocky world of climate chaos, we're seeing many more examples of this. Localization in this context is survival. We will be facing more shocks, more novel viruses, more cataclysmic storms. Our communities must prepare by becoming more self-sufficient, more able to provide for our basic food, energy, and medical needs. Self-sufficient is not the same as isolated or parochial or insular. I'm an internationalist, but more sturdy, more ready, and more resilient communities is what we need.
Let's create a fair playing field. Let's stop giving subsidies to big business. Let's get the tax code fair so that local economies have a fair chance to thrive. Let's stop using the farm bill to give 90% of our farm subsidies to the biggest farms. You know, if we go down the list, there are so many ways in which policy is working in favor of the big guys. And if we level that playing field and if we recognize the various benefits that local businesses bring, I think we'll get very different outcomes.
ぜひそういった多様な食文化、それから多様な命をしっかりと守っていけるような法律を作っていくことによって日本国内においてもそうですし、ひいては世界においてもそうしたローカリゼーションの活動がしっかりできるようにしていきたいと思っています。
역시 전주에서도 지역과 관련해서 뭐 지역 금융이라든지 지역 에너지라든지 지역 먹거리라든지 많은 일들을 하고 있습니다.
Those communities in the United States with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita job growth rate. In other words, the best way of reducing poverty, increasing equality, is to go local.
Localization addresses people's mounting concerns with the cost of living, with their financial security. Simultaneously, it reduces emissions and other environmental destruction. It's a vision that bridges social and environmental issues, the rural and urban divide, and the political left and right. It's a unique opportunity to build a broad-based movement that could bring about fundamental systemic change.
Only the tiniest fraction of the global population is actively involved in promoting the continued globalization of the economy. By contrast, those working for a fundamentally different future can be numbered in the hundreds of millions.
Se pravi, prišli smo do mejnika, ko se bo treba resnično odločiti, v katero smer bomo šli, govorim v imenu človeštva, ali v smer, ki je človeku dana, torej k obdelovanju zemlje, k samooskrbi, k prevzemanju odgovornosti za naša lastna življenja, ali pa v smer, ki nam je ponujena, torej v globalistično, kapitalistično družbo.
This is a vital time to do different kinds of activisms, different kinds of work. So power needs to change. Our notions of power need to change. If power is always at a distance, then we will frame economics and the economy as food coming from far away. And we will valorize, reify, ordain, and celebrate a system that denies us the immediacy of our surroundings.
So do you see that the mission of this movement is bigger than ever before? Let's keep moving for localizing the whole world so that one day we can brag to our children or grandchildren that we did not give up at the critical moment to protect their future and our planet.
And in Brazil, we say decolonizing our imagination. Stop thinking that industrialization is the only way to go and technology is the only way to go. There are other ways of living that it's going to make us maybe even more happy.
We have to take a stand for what we are recognizing as important and essential to our full human beingness.
Move people away from this idea that we're in a kind of Darwinian struggle, one against the other, into the notion that we live in communities and we must help each other in communities.
So それが私たちがまさに生きること、いわゆるローカリゼーションだ。それが始まったと私どもそう思っています。どうかみんな頑張りましょう。
the real change does not come from the top. Real change does not come from the center. Mahatma Gandhi did not work from the House of Parliament or President's house. Martin Luther King did not come from the White House. We have to focus on building grassroots movement stronger and stronger and stronger, and that is the future for the local economy and human scale paradigm.
Economic localization aligns with fundamental principles of life. It protects and restores biodiversity, and it answers our deep, innate human need for connection. It's an unstoppable force. I hope now we're going to be joined by Manish, Jain, Chris, Smaje. Are you there, Chris? Well, Manish, you and I can start before Chris gets back. We'll have a little bit of a discussion and also just briefly to hear for a few minutes from you what you've been doing to support this movement.
Yes. Salam, namaste, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm feeling very pumped up after seeing the film again, Helena. It's a great way to start off the year. One of the things we're really excited about is this year has been declared the International Year of Millets by the UN, and it's being pushed in a big way, actually even by the Indian government, which is a very welcome but surprising initiative. And I think that this is very significant because it is really, millets have been have suffered a lot from the development paradigm. They were made into kind of the ugly cousins. Wheat and rice were promoted in a massive way over the last 40, 50 years in the Green Revolution frameworks. And I think this opportunity of millets is something that we are really, really working on a lot. The region I'm from in Rajasthan, all over Rajasthan, actually, there are at least 10 different kinds of millets that grow here and are still part of people's diets, particularly during fasting seasons. Millets are still quite popular. But for me, millets, I think, represents a much larger potential. It's a shift from, agricultural universities back to local knowledge systems. It's a shift from experts back to the knowledge of our grandmothers. It's a shift from large-scale industrial farmers back into small indigenous farmers who still hold on to this knowledge. It's a shift from the COP kinds of climate action to actually local climate action. So I think there's a real potential with it. We've had a beautiful millet food festival in our city that we helped to host, and really helping people to bring in a lot of different energies together around this. One of the things that I seeing the film, what got really triggered for me was there's a real deep need for a new kind of politics, the way we think of politics. In India, we started talking about shifting from the politics of mainstreaming to the politics of many streaming. And this idea, I think, has a few interesting dimensions. So one, in what we're trying to do in Udaipur is to really create a kind of politics where we're bringing together people across different sectors, local government, local spiritual leaders, local doctors, of course, local farmers, urban and rural farmers, local restaurant owners, together to think about how we can work together more on the millets platform and generally on natural and organic farming. And I think that is really interesting because there's a deep, really profound possibility to come bring people from different ideological and political backgrounds together around food. So more than anything I've seen in the world, food is actually the thing that really can bring people to transcend, the kind of really debilitating and nasty kind of politics we see playing out in the world. And I think the other part of it, which I think is really important, is this kind of politics that is emerging around this is can be focused much more around healing and reconnecting us. Healing, there's a lot of discussion about the kind of trauma that intergenerational trauma that many communities have faced. And I think, there's a term I think that was coined in the West, nature deficit disorder. So there's a huge amount of trauma for all the people who've been schooled away from, again, connection to their local rivers, mountains, forests. And a way to kind of, I think the word that we're using a lot is relationality, and the politics of relationality, reconnecting again to our rebuilding community, and also to the more than human world again, and how we bring that and our ancestors bringing that back into our worldviews of how we look forward. And the last thing I think I just wanted to add is I call it politics of unlearning, which is really important. And so these more in the film also, what was I think over and over raised was this, our underlying notions of happiness and success, progress and development, and most importantly, I think real wealth. How do we understand real wealth outside of this fake money system, which actually creates more sense of scarcity and insecurity? And when we actually connect to real wealth, we feel more sense of abundance and vitality and things like that. So I think at the core of all of this, what I'm finding most important and most critical is really the sense of dignity, restoring the dignity of farming and food, again, which has really been lost, where many people who have grown up and gone to formal education see farmers as unskilled labor, as uneducated and all of that. And I think that this movement of local food that we're all talking about can really play a major role to restoring the dignity of farmers and food. And in India, I say we have a saying, Jai Kisan, Jai Bhagwan. So I say, if you want to come close to God, go and meet a farmer. So I think this is what.
Thank you. I should also introduce you because somehow in the program, I don't think they have, and probably our fault, but Manish is a very interesting individual, having been educated in America, went to Harvard, worked with the UN, worked in the finance industry, and then seeing how destructive this global top-down economic system was, he went back to India to learn from his illiterate grandmother. So it's a beautiful summary of the sort of wisdom that we're trying to share in all our work, and why you're such a dear and close colleague to us in Local Futures. And now I'd like to also give Chris Smaje a chance to tell us why he's been such an eloquent and such an important proponent of small-scale farming. So if you could please say something about that, Chris.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Sorry, I disappeared. I just got to the bit in the film with Naomi Klein talking about the vulnerability of sort of global connectivity when my internet went down. So it kind of sort of proved the point in a way, but joys of off-grid living. So It may go again, so apologies. But anyway, I'm glad to be here. And yeah, great film, really moving. And I guess it kind of answered the question you posed to me. I think you answered beautifully in the film. I mean, you know, we're part of this kind of mainstream narrative about a sort of global cheap food paradigm, and people say, well, you know, isn't that great, cheap food? But it's not great. I mean, it's kind of a race to the bottom, which puts farmers and consumers in competition with each other, which pushes people into precarity, you know, in all the ways that you showed in the film. It's based on abundant and polluting energy that, you know, we can't take for granted in the future. You know, we've got to decarbonize, we've got to get you know, we've got to get used to a more localized, lower energy system. It's bad for nature and wildlife. You know, it tends to focus on a handful of commodity crops, which are great crops in and of themselves, but not in the quantities and in the way that we produce them. You know, they're bad for our health. And it sort of relies on you know, again, you talked about it very well in the film, as a sort of a kind of pipeline of public money that ends up in the coffers of corporations to you know, that's a kind of a whole set of explicit and often implicit subsidies. So I guess, like a lot of people in the film, you know, when you sort of piece all that together, I guess my journey has been to try and not be part of that, and as best I can to articulate the localist vision. I mean, I've helped to run a small farm, a small market garden here on the edge of a small town where I live. A bit like Humphrey was saying in the film, you know, the need to sort of rebuild that kind of local provision of fresh fruit and veg locally. And I guess the sort of things, I mean, there were some things in the film that really spoke to me. One is the point about structure, the need for structural change, and particularly around access to land. I mean, here in the UK, I think people are very good in their local communities in defending local community, looking out for nature, but we haven't really connected that to a narrative about food and farming, because people are so alienated from farming. Farming is so large scale, so industrial, mechanized. It's not part of most people's everyday experience. So, you know, that's a real key thing that, you know, we don't know it yet, but there is a struggle around access to land, which is about the right to produce food locally. And I think, as you said, Helena, you know, the sort of mainstream politics we have of the left and the right, progressives and conservatives, you know, neither of them are getting it quite right. It's almost like there's a narrative of autonomy amongst conservatives and a narrative of community on the left, but it's kind of too totalizing, and you know, the kind of way that we think about those words in, you know, within the kind of contemporary paradigm is, you know, we don't have real autonomy and we don't have real community. So a kind of, I think somebody mentioned it in the film, you know, a real autonomy is about being able to produce food for yourself and your household, to make real livelihood decisions, but that can only be done, it can only succeed within a wider community that is supportive of that. So I mean, I like to think of in terms of autonomy and community, you know, real autonomy, not a kind of consumerist autonomy, which is not really an autonomy. You know, you're completely dependent on these wider frameworks. So that spoke to me.
Yeah, I'd love to just add to that I think one of the big differences in our work, coming from a lot of experience in the non-industrialized, non-Western world, is that the key issue that's being missed is the difference between the autonomy that is only possible really through human scale community, through the interdependence of smaller communities. And so on the one hand, the sort of community that the left promotes is actually a top-heavy, top-down monocultural industrial system. And of course, the autonomy that the right promotes is not actually possible. So it's really Yeah, and the right, paradoxically, is now promoting the most radical transformation of transferring wealth into these very few corporations.
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think, I think it's really critical to be, just articulating and developing that, autonomy and community just go hand in hand, and they have to be meaningful locally. And most of our sort of familiar big political frameworks, they sort of tell a little bit of that story, but not enough, not in the right way, not in a grounded way. And again, I think urbanism was an interesting theme in the film. It's a huge issue that I'm sort of wrestling with at the moment in various ways. But the need for towns and cities to be connected locally to food production. We again, Naomi Klein's point, we can't rely on these huge global, very vulnerable supply chains, which is what kind of makes the sort of mega cities and that whole kind of urban narrative possible. We have to people in urban situations have to start asking questions about food, about where their food comes from, and start trying to promote more sustainable and more local routes by which food is available. So so all of those aspects of the film I thought absolutely spot on and very much close to my concerns. So really enjoyed watching it. It was great.
Wow, thank you. And I think Manish would also second me in saying that here too, the whole issue of urbanization it's been much clearer in the non-Western world, in the so-called developing world, that the mass urbanization, pushing hundreds of millions of people into these vast and ever-growing mega cities, is a complete disaster. And every step of the way, those urban centers ensure that the per capita consumption of resources goes up and pollution escalates. It's an issue that has not been so clear in the sort of Western world, and it's actually happening in the West still. As you know, Chris, we've got less than 3% of people in farming, and I'm worried it might be much less than that now in England. It's a long time ago we used to raise awareness about the fact that there were more prisoners in America than there were farmers. And by now it's going to be a massively more prisoners. And from our analysis, this mass urbanization, which breaks down communities, so paradoxically, we're heaped on top of each other. We don't know each other. We don't depend on each other, because those cities have been created by the forces of that centralizing, globalizing economy, which started with colonialism and enclosures, and then has escalated into now, tragically, a system that is so vast and so big that most people don't see it. So in our work, we're constantly faced with this reaction where people say, well, we know all that. We all know. Why are you saying this? We don't need those films. Why do you go on about, we know all that. But our experience is that people know. They're framing things in a way, above all, I would say that the major issue in the way things are framed to prevent people from seeing what's going on is that the dominant narrative is maintaining that the reason we are going to hell in a handbasket is because you Westerners, particularly you Western middle class people, you just don't want to let go of your gadgets and your goods, and you're so well off already that you are destroying the climate. And how do you dare to complain and have depression and anxiety because you are better off than anyone in the world? A central message that we want to get out as quickly and forcefully as possible is that those people have actually been pushed in such a way that since the 60s, the average person is working many more hours per day. Already in the 90s, Juliet Schor from Harvard, an economist, showed how the average American was working 1 month more per year. And it's what actually has been shown by some female economists in great detail is that these people who are meant to be these consumers who don't want to let go of their luxury and their desire for more and more goods, are actually buying fewer goods, systematically fewer, deeper in debt, working harder and harder just to keep a roof over their head. Now, as you can see in England, to pay for the energy for heating, to pay for their food, healthcare. So for us, one of the most important messages is please, please wake up and join a movement for fundamental economic change. And when you see the connection to the urbanizing path, the destruction of farming and food security, and then when you also see the healing that is occurring in small steps in those middle classes in the West that do reconnect to the land and to community, and particularly around these vitally important opportunities to actually increase productivity, reduce pollution, etc. So that local food movement, is for us the most central and the most important. I'd like now to show Mika, who made a recorded presentation, because it looks like she's not going to be able to join us before we go into the Zoom. So can we please see that message from Mika?
Hi, everyone. This is Mika Tsutsumi, international journalist from Japan. 2 weeks ago, I published my new book called Broken Food, How We Escaped from Dominant Food System to Sustainable Local-Based One with Diversity, where Helena wrote a wonderful, wonderful message for this book. Thank you. Because nowadays, corporate media in many countries are beginning to make a big fuss over climate change and food shortage, and state that new food system with digital and biotech is the answer. However, we must be aware of that this is all about power, because our agriculture and food sectors are mostly dominated by just 4 to 6 global corporations that exercise enormous influence over markets, agricultural research, guideline of food safety, policy making, undermining our food sovereignty and diversity. The people who are agitating for new food system are those who control the current monopoly system, such as agribusinesses, big tech, and big financial institutions. For example, food tech, fake burgers, gene-edited fish, and cell-grown baby milk. Well, they all seem exciting and convenient. They all are marketed as good for climate change. But remember, those technologies are being patented by the monoculture-based multinational corporations and the financial industry, of course. And mass productions will create their monopoly market again. So they are targeting the good intentions of veganism, animal welfare, environmental protections for the new monoculture 2.0, which is deleting diversity in the food system. For example, in my country, Japan, our government is more on the side of WTO, monoculture, digitalized corporate agriculture by big corporations. Yet, people are starting to realize that it is about sovereignty and diversity. So citizens stood up and pressured their local governments to allocate public funds to organic school lunch. So public money supports local farmers, local economy, and organic farming helps restoring microorganisms in soil, which keeps much of carbon dioxide under the soil as well. So therefore, now is our chance, big chance, to escape from corporate dominant system, because the food and agriculture sectors in particular is a crucial area to decentralize power, maintain sovereignty, and maximize diversity to create our sustainable future. So localization is the only way to make this happen. So let's keep on moving together. We can do it. Thank you.
So now we are moving into the Zoom room, and where we'll be having some questions and more of a discussion. So please join us in the Zoom room. We will all have a link available. And for us, Manish, that's in the chat. And I hope Chris is going to be able to join us.